Hello, everyone, and welcome on in. It is look. It's Final Four Saturday. I know everybody else at the Gambler here is down at the Wells Fargo Center for WrestleMania, but there's basketball on. It's the Final Four. We've been building up to this the entire month, and we're here with two big games. Myself, Joe Tansey, along with Sean Barnard. All of our March Madness coverage here at the Gambler, presented by AAA. Be ready, get AAA. Look, the real hoop heads are on this stream, Sean. Everybody else is out drinking. It's 5:00 on a Saturday, and we're here with your Final Four breakdown.
Yeah, this morning on the Tough Cover radio show with Mark Henry Jr., him and Jeremy hit me with, you're definitely watching WrestleMania tonight, right? And I'm like, boys, it's the Final Four. How in the world would I be watching WrestleMania? So, yeah, I'm still locked in on the hoop scene, and I'm very excited for both these games tonight.
We are the only two able-bodied people at the Gambler left to do this breakdown, so you're stuck with us. Like I said, everyone else is at least a few beers deep already watching. I can't call it. Can I call it the fake sports?
I take no offense to that. I think there are people that will.
So look, I can understand why, though. The excitement is a little bit not. It's pretty calm, pretty tame for the Final Four, right? It's UConn against Alabama, Purdue against NC State, two massive spreads on the board. Everybody is kind of just waiting for this UConn-Purdue Godzilla versus King Kong matchup in the final. And yeah, I'm not going to lie. I kind of want to see it too. Like, we've reached this point. We've gotten this far. And I know I've mentioned it like in streams earlier this season that there's a little bit of a Gonzaga-Baylor vibe to this season where you had the elite of the elite and then everybody else. Well, that's where we're at now. It really feels like that Gonzaga-Baylor season where let's get the top two teams here. Let's have them in a heavyweight prize fight. And I'm not going to lie. I kind of think that's where we're going to go. But we're the Gambler here. We got to make sure these teams cover as well. I think that's the interesting part with two big spreads on the board, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was kind of a lot of heat on this tournament early on for the lack of upsets and lack of crazy results. But this paved the path for really what seems to be, very clearly the two best teams. And I guess you can kind of throw Houston in that conversation that they kind of played themselves into that during the middle of the season. But in reality, it's kind of been Purdue and UConn from start to finish this season. So cool that the paths have aligned to see this at the national stage, assuming both take care of business tonight. I think we're kind of tipping our hat that this is the way we're leaning. But of course, that is the beauty of gambling, that we got a nice number attached to each and a pretty significant spread at this point in the tournament for sure. So excited to talk about that.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we can all sit here and say UConn's going to play Purdue on Monday, right? Mm-hmm. But are they both going to cover? Like, are they going to be close games? And I think, to be honest with you, UConn-Alabama is the far more fascinating matchup, right? Because, look, NC State's the underdog story, and we'll get into that game. I know it's the first one, but I kind of want to get into UConn-Alabama first because this is the marquee game of the night. The spread is right now 11 points for UConn at DraftKings Sportsbook. The over-under is 160.5. By now, you know Alabama, fast-paced offense. All they love to do is run and gun. UConn hasn't let a team over 60 points in the entire NCAA tournament, playing really good defense. So if you're looking at UConn, you're probably thinking, what, the under? And if you're looking at Bama, you're probably looking at the over. That's what you would think, right? And that's kind of where, I guess, where you lie, right? If you think Bama can be in this, you think it's going to be a high-scoring game. If you think UConn's in this, I think they're going to play or wins this. I think they're going to do it with some pretty tight defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the give and take of this one specifically. Donovan Clingan's been absolutely terrific this tournament, and that's the guy that I'm going to have my eyes all over. That's kind of, I think, where the battle will go down for this offense versus defensive kind of matchup is if he can hang with the fast pace of Alabama. Personally, I do think that he is capable enough for the challenge, that he's a guy that I see his NBA stock continuing to just soar and soar.
Number 3 on the ESPN mock draft today.
And good for him, deservingly so, that I do think he is a game that straight up translates. But for this matchup specifically, for Alabama, as great as they are offensively, I think it gets understated how poor they are defensively. That on the season, allowing 81.1 points per game, which ranks 356th out of 362 qualifying teams, also 306th in defensive rating. They really can't stop anybody. And that's kind of where my concern goes, is I do think that UConn's defense is a little more dominant. So while I think that Alabama, their real only chance in this game is to pick up the tempo, force things to go fast, I think UConn is really the only team that isn't going to fall victim to this and be able to clamp down when everything's said and done.
Well, I mean, look, Alabama, the biggest flaw with them all season long, right, has been the defense, and that's why we've been fight with them pretty much all season, and that's why I kind of looked at Charleston as maybe an upset team over Alabama at one point in the first round. Look, I think defensively they haven't faced a team of UConn stature, and I think that's what ends up being their downfall. But you also have to look at the matchup with Klingon, right? Alabama, their guards are going to do a lot of good things on the outside, but then also look at what Alabama likes to do, right? Threes and paint shots. There's no jumpers. Like it's like an immaculate grid of analytics and what exactly they want to do.
Which is basketball these days, to be honest. Like that's the analytic shot. That's what they're clearly leaning into, and you do have to get the logic. But yeah,
right. And if you're doing that though, and you have a 7'2" guy in Donovan Klingon, in the paint, that's where it becomes a difficult matchup, right? Because Alabama, they've got some paint guys, but none of them as dominant as Klingon. So there's the conundrum there, right? If you're on Alabama, you kind of have to bank on them hitting 16, 17 threes, which they can. Like that's the fascinating part about Bama is like, well, look, they could do it if they're really on.
Yeah.
But if they're not, and UConn's all over them, and UConn's got this track record now of the last two tournaments of just being all over everybody, like where does the convincing argument for Alabama lie, at least for an entire 40 minutes? It's tough, isn't it?
It is, and especially when them being headlined by Mark Sears, who I love, is a terrific player, but this is the type of matchup that I just think he's going to be struggling. That the size disadvantage that he's going to be at. I'm seeing the Jalen Brunson comparisons all over the place for him, and you obviously can see that, the fact that he's a lefty, the way that he moves, the way that he gets to his spots on the floor. But there's kind of some concern in me that there's a little bit more Sharif Cooper in his game, kind of that fast pace, and he's more under control and probably not as built on athleticism, but I do think there's more of a shelf life to that style, and I think UConn specifically is a team built to combat that I don't see it going to be as easy for Mark Sears to be able to get to his spots on the floor in the way that he's been able to really throughout this whole season. And again, a terrific player, but every matchup I kind of dive down into this, it feels like everything leans UConn, and the only real argument that you have for Alabama, they're going to have to shoot the lights out, that it is going to be a live or die with the three-pointer. We mentioned the up tempo. It's not just getting out in transition and getting on the fast break. It's a lot of getting out in transition and getting that free, quick three-point look. That's the style that they're going to have to lean into, especially tonight. And really, they're going to live or die with what percentage they shoot from beyond that three-point arc.
And I will say, I know that the biggest kind of myth, I guess we can call it that, especially in this situation, is that football stadium equals bad shooting all the time. Well, that's not the case in this specific situation at State Farm Stadium in Glendale. The Final Four was back there 5 years ago. All four teams in the Final Four eclipsed the 70-point mark. That's something to just keep in your head, so that I know sight lines and shooting a basketball and football stadium. So you can't use that as your excuse today, but I'm still betting the under. Look, everything I've seen from UConn suggests that that's not going to change. And yes, they can certainly win an 85-80 game, right? Yeah. But they're going to enforce their style right away. They're going to make Alabama not only take threes, but take tough threes. And that's really what it comes down to. They're going to make Mark Sears' life a living hell on defense. And unless you're getting Klingon in the early foul trouble, where's the difference you're going to find in the paint? And that's where it's hard for me to grasp what Alabama could do in this situation.
Yeah, I would say my fault to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I think that rebounding battle is going to be where this game is kind of over, that I see Alabama having no choice, that it is going to be a one and done type of possession, or one and done possessions just every time down the floor. That on the season for UConn, they're limiting opponents to the 7th fewest rebounds per game. They also rank 11th in defensive ratings and block shots at the 11th best rate. So you're not going to have quite that same path of getting to the rim, and just like the size disadvantage, and really just not that, like, even when you want to compare like a DJ Burns in this Purdue matchup, like you can kind of talk yourself into that being such a disadvantage that maybe it's different enough. There's not even that angle in Alabama as far as the rebounding battle and that type of thing. So I think Klingon's going to have a field day today, and looks very clear to have the inside track on player of the tournament, assuming that UConn comes out on top.
And then when you look at the rebounding, it also takes away second chance opportunities, which again cuts into the amount of shots that Alabama can take. Like, I do think this is going to be a slower game. Alabama is going to try and push the pace, but there's been only one really blip on UConn's defense, and that was the end of the second half against Northwestern in the second round. Other than that, they've been phenomenal on defense. And you can't even point to, well, Alabama plays a different style, but Illinois played one of the fastest styles in the country as well. One of the top 5 teams to the over all season long. And look at what they did to Illinois. Like, I just, because UConn saw the exact same type of matchup with UConn, fast-paced, really strong guard play, better guard play, for being honest, Terrence Shannon over Mark Sears, I think they're very well prepared for this game. They would be regardless, but I think because of that, it makes them even more prepared for this. Look, the under's 160.5. I don't think it gets anywhere remotely close to that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm with you on the under, that I do think that they're just going to have their shots limited too much for them to be able to keep up, and no opportunity for the second chance. And again, it is going to come down to the 3-pointer. But I did want to pick your brain on the spread exactly there. That 11 points is a lot. And we pretty much mentioned, have been very clear that UConn kind of has the advantages all across the court. But that's a big number, especially at this stage. What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's a big number unless you think it's UConn, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean that's the thing. They've dispelled this notion of, can a team not repeat? And they've done it. Like, every question's been answered by UConn. So like, at what point do you stop doubting UConn? Look, I speak from personal experience. I was on San Diego State, the Sweet 16, thought, okay, if this is the matchup, that would be the matchup for UConn to slow down. And I don't think there is a matchup where UConn gets slowed down. I think even if they do play Purdue in the national championship, look, they're going to be favored, and it's really going to be down to how UConn handles that game, and could they beat themselves? Look, if they're going to hold Alabama to a smaller shooting percentage, then yeah, you have to look at the 11. And I mean, look at the second half run they put on against Illinois. That's still fresh in your head too, right?
Yeah.
So look, they can absolutely do it. And if Alabama is cold, they're going to be cold. And you can't really come back against a team like UConn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk myself into the plus 11 for Alabama, but I just can't quite do it. That I don't think this team's going to roll over. I don't think that this squad is built like that from Alabama. But I just, like, even comparing to that Illinois game, that was one of the more dominant performances or just stretches of basketball that we've seen, like, period. The way that they just completely locked down that game, completely enforced their will on both sides of the ball, and specifically the ways these teams are constructed. You mentioned it earlier, but Terrence Shannon Jr. is a guy who, he's big, he's athletic, he's got the 6'5" size. That is not Mark Sears. That is not what he does.
No.
He's much more crafty, the smallest guy on the court, and still a very good basketball player. No shade about it. But I just don't see him having success in this type of matchup. So I am with you. I do think UConn ultimately covers the minus 11. I think Alabama hangs with them early, and we have a game for at least the first half. But I think things break open in the second half, and this ends up getting a little bit ugly.
Yeah, look, I feel that way probably as well. Look, I'm most confident in the under. I think that's kind of the way to go, the way UConn's defense has been playing. But look, it's really difficult to say don't bet UConn at the 11. I mean, you could even kind of look into this. I think the first half line might even be the way to go with UConn. Like, so if you think UConn is going to control this game, right, and Alabama's not going to get into any type of rhythm, the UConn -6 bet in the first half looks a lot more palatable than -11. I think that's a way to go too if you're looking at UConn. Another way to look at it is, depending on how the styles clash. This is a little more interesting though, because the team totals in the first half, UConn 40.5, but Alabama 34.5. That starts to make you think, right?
Yeah.
Like if Alabama ends up getting like the right combination of shots, do they get to the line? Do they get clinging in foul trouble? Like, does that work? I just don't know. A lot of these things are fascinating, but I think I'm still going to stick with the under. But I can see where, like, just my mind did there. You go from point to point to point, and you're like, "Whoa, this looks fascinating too." I'm on the under. I think you've convinced yourself into UConn though.
Yeah, on the under and on -11 as well. And I think the really only hope for Alabama, you kind of touched on at the end. You got to get Clingan in foul trouble. You have to get him off the court for you to have a chance. I don't trust that to be the case. I just don't quite. He's a smart basketball player on top of his massive size, athleticism, and everything. I've been just incredibly impressed with him, and I think the Klingon versus Edey battle is going to be one for the ages assuming we see that. So I don't see that being the case. I'm a little bit tempted for the UConn under 85.5. That
does look tempting.
Yeah, I could very much see them making a conscious effort to slow the pace and really kind of just breathe the life out of Alabama.
Yeah.
They can win in any way they want to, UConn. They can play with their food a little bit. They can try and run. That's a high number for this game, and I do think that they're going to be focused on stopping Alabama from getting out and making this a track meet. So I am looking at that under 85 pretty heavily as well.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. Because it's all so intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is when you look at these big games and analyze them, and there's only two of them to break down. Let's talk about the other one because there's tip-off in 45 minutes. Purdue and NC State. Purdue is a 9-point favorite. The over-under is 146.5. As much as I think there's going to be some defensive stops in the first game, I think this is going to be the push the pace game. I like the over in this one, 146.5. But Purdue's guards can make a ton of shots. And when you look at Zach Edey himself, you think the whistle's going to change?
That's the $1 million question. I mean, we might as well add a couple fouls to DJ Burns right now before we even tip off.
Like if Burns goes out, I think it's also worth noting Diarra, the other big man, won't break fast from Ramadan until sundown, which in Phoenix would be after the game ends. Doing the math off the top of my head. So that's an important factor to, I mean, look, he's been playing all tournament like that, but that's something when you're going up against Zach Edey, sure. Even little details like that matter. So I think that's something to keep in mind with NC State as well. Yeah, I mean, how many points is Edey gonna have just the line alone? 15, 20?
Yeah, likely. And he has turned himself into a really good free throw shooter as well. That's not an area. And to me, that's like a huge swing skill that I look for in big man. I think that can make or break a game for teams. And Edey's done a really nice job, even with the air balls down the stretch in the late game, last game. It's because he was gassed. He real deal is an efficient shooter from the line. And I give him a lot of credit too, that I very much was a Zach Edey skeptic, especially after last year. His movement significantly better this year, just his way to move around the floor, the way that he's found ways to use his body, get to his spots. He just looks incredibly more polished this year as a basketball player. So a huge shout out to him for putting the work in. I have talked myself into the +9 for NC State for this game, though. And so the fouling is kind of the $1 million swing that if you get DJ Burns in foul trouble, this game's basically over in the first half. And I will give a little love. DJ Horn, their guard, is also a very good player. He's gone very underrated in the conversation because Burns has kind of captured the hearts of America. But what I think like I could see playing out is I think they're going to make Edey make some decisions, and that DJ Burns is a very efficient mid-range shooter as well, that he's very comfortable pulling up from that kind of elbow range, extended a little in front of the three-point line. You're going to make Edey make some tough decisions too. Does he go out and guard from there? Do you let him sit in the paint? And that does start to create some problems for this Purdue defense. Edey's much more comfortable when he is that true anchor of a defense, rim protecting big. So I could see that causing some issues for stretches. I don't think NC State has enough in the tank to really give them a full chance at winning this. I think this probably ends in kind of a 5 or 6 point victory for Purdue, with NC State trying to get their way into some sort of hold on the game throughout. But I do think 9's a little heavy for this one.
So I've kind of gone back and forth on that. And the way I've kind of had this whole thing play out in my head is the over looks a lot better to me. And the reason I think that is, so what you just mentioned with Burns. So if you're trying to take Zach Edey out of a basketball game, you're not going to go directly at him. That's stupid.
Yeah.
So you're going to try and either pull him out on pick and roll, make him make that decision on who to go with, maybe test his mobility, or in the case of DJ Burns, maybe make it 2 or 3 steps outside of the painted area.
Yep.
And make him test it and see if you can get an early cheapie on him. Like it's going to be little things like that. Going directly at him is just plain flat out stupid.
Yeah.
You don't do that in this game. But where I do see the over coming into play is if Edey's going to get his. The game plan for NC State is let Edey get his, but make sure you guard the perimeter so well that the Purdue guards have nothing. And Gonzaga specifically struggled immensely with that in the Sweet 16, where they put all of their energy on slowing down Edey, and then boom, one outlet pass boom, one out in the pass. And 3-point shots are being made left and right by Purdue. NC State's guards are going to have to play a huge role in this game, which is why I think it leans over. I mean, 146, that's going to be, 73 each? I think it's very attainable. And if the game is kind of close towards the end, of course, foul shots come into the play. I also think because Edey has gotten the whistle, and if you're handicapping in, you have to because of what you've seen in the NCAA tournament. If Purdue's getting the whistle, that factors into the double bonus happening earlier than it usually does in an NCAA tournament game. Well, that means free points. I think we're going to see a lot of free throws in this game. I think that's where the difference lies when you get to the over. Yes, Purdue's defense has been pretty decent. They haven't allowed a team over 70 points, but they've scored over 70 in each game. And as we've seen with NC State, look, the fear is just not there. And they've been scoring in the 70s very regularly as well. And that's what kind of leads me to this confidence here that we're going to see points in the first game and then maybe a few less points in the second game, and watch me be completely wrong and have it completely flip-flopped.
Yeah, that's the beauty of sports right there. But I know the Zach Edey whistle has been a hot topic in sports in general. Where do you sit on that, Tansey? Do you have any issue with the way that he is refereed, or you just kind of feel it is what it is?
Well, if you're the other team, are you complaining about the referee because your defending sucks? Like he's not like it's not like he's new. It's not like they implanted an alien 7-footer just in time for the NCAA tournament, right?
Right.
Like, these coaches are so smart and have so much time to scheme up and deal with Zach Edey, and yet nothing's worked. Maybe it's just because he's that good. He's that good of a college basketball player where you have to do the old strategy of let him get his and then defend the other 4 guys on the floor. That's the only way you're going to beat Purdue, unless you're pulling an alien out of space that is the height of a Monstar. Like, and you just, that doesn't exist in real life. So like that's the problem I have with the Edey whistle conversation. Sure, there's been 1 or 2. I think there was an over the back call last weekend that was really cheap, but for the most part, like, I think it comes down more to me than defensive style and defensive game plan than it does against like what he. It's not like he's just standing there. And we've seen plenty of 7-footers do this in college basketball before. It's not like he's just standing there, gets the ball, can't move, and it's not Taco Fall, right?
Right.
This is actually the point you made. Like, Purdue's had this history of like signing these big oafs, Isaac Haas, Matt Harms, and they kind of work, but they're nowhere close to the dominant. Like, Zach Edey is kind of the final level of Pokemon of Purdue big men, where sure. Like we had Isaac Haas, we had Matt Harms, and now we get like the final boss version in Zach Edey that is just everything Purdue's wanted to do with a big man for so long, and it works so perfectly. I think, look, yeah, there's going to be maybe 1 or 2 fouls we disagree with, but we're not out here disagreeing with every single foul that's being called against Zach Edey. And that's, to me, where I kind of just like, I shrug and like, yeah, it's going to happen. But the way you adjust to those things is how you win those games.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that. And this is coming from a guy who watches Joel Embiid play on a just about every night basis. So I'm quite familiar with a lot of these tactics. To put the numbers out there for Edey as far as free throw line, I was curious kind of progression through his career. So obviously some of this going with the way that he's played through the offense. And I'll just use the last 2 years because this is kind of the more specific, I guess, a fair comparison. Got to the free throw line 7.1 times per game last year, 11.5 this year. And then on the season as a whole this year, he's attempted 424 total free throws. The next highest in the country is PJ Haggerty in Tulsa with 309. So over 120 more free throw attempts than anyone else in the country this year. It's a lot, but there's also very few 7'4" guys, and that is the driving force of this entire argument, which I do think people lose sight of in it. I struggle to be too critical of it because I mostly feel that, like, the same way with Joel, that if you don't want him to shoot free throws, then don't foul him. That's kind of the argument there. I do think Edey gets away with a little bit. The elbows specifically do jump out at me at times. He does get away with kind of the hooks and spins. And I will say, like, with Purdue and with Edey, how this game is officiated will dictate, like, his impact and their team's chances more so than just about any player. but we've seen the way it's been called so far, and it certainly has provided the opportunity for him to get those free points. So I don't know if I see that changing tonight, but I think it's going to be quite entertaining just to see the mismatched bodies of DJ Burns and Zach stretches tonight.
Oh, it's going to be ridiculous to see, like, and it's two perfectly strong big men too, right? So that's what makes it so fascinating, is they'll get the job done in both capacities. I think we see both of them. I really hope DJ Burns doesn't get into foul trouble like immediately. I hope we get to see him for a good stretch. I think if you're betting NC State, that has to be your biggest fear. If DJ Burns gets into foul trouble, you're kind of screwed with that. But yeah, I think we see points in this game. Like I said, I don't subscribe much to the basketball and football stadiums theory, at least as much as other people do. And I think with this matchup specifically, with the amount of fouls we're going to get, I definitely see the over pushing up at that point. And it's a nice round number at 146.5.
And to get back to the +9, kind of my blueprint, if I'm sitting in that locker room and making the game plan for this NC State team, I'm pretty much playing through DJ Burns as the point guard of this team. That I think you set him up as the mid-range shooter, let him play out of the elbow, and then have a ton of movement around him. That you allow him. He's a very good playmaker. His feel for the game is really strong. So I think you maximize that, and that puts Purdue in the pickle of, you bring Edey out on him. It wouldn't even surprise me if they try and switch and throw another look at him if they continue to do that. But then that creates the same problem of Edey has to guard somebody unless they're going zone defense for stretches, which I could see happening for sure. But I do think that's the way you go about it, is you punish them from the mid-range, you allow DJ Burns to use that as his primary offense, and then you have a ton of movement coming around him. He reminds me very much, and not to go fat guy to fat guy, but Kenny Lofton Jr. is really the comp that I see for DJ Burns, and it's kind of for the same driving force, that I think both those guys, that playmaking is sneaky their strength as a player, even though you get distracted by a ton of the post game and all the other things that they do bring to the table. That's kind of the separating skill set that I see for Burns, and that's really the only way I'm squinting at this and seeing NC State having a chance.
Yeah, look, I want one of these teams to have a chance, and I think by Murphy's Law, we probably get one of them to do it. I think because of matchup-wise and because of fate and all this stuff, I think NC State is just way more equipped to handle this moment than Alabama. I think Alabama is going to be jacking threes left and right with way more adrenaline than they usually do.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And I'm with you that I don't think the football stadium conversation is really relevant in this. People cling to any angle or anything that they can get to, and
there have been Final Fours where like it rings true, but when you see 70 in each from each team in each semifinal 6 years ago, it's kind of like, well, sure, but it's not my favorite argument.
Yeah, and I think you can even make the same case that it is just nerves of a bigger arena, bigger stage, or anything like that you can come to. I'm not buying into that as the driving force, and that is going to be the make or break for Alabama. These are very differently constructed basketball games. Like, as much as we're talking about it leading to the big dogs for the actual championship, assuming Purdue and UConn, we're kind of going to see polar opposite styles of play in these two games. So I think that aspect of things is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it will be two really, really good games. Once again, all of our March Madness coverage here at Fox Sports Gambler, presented by AAA. Be ready, get AAA. Sean, I think that does it. I think we get to enjoy our fun time that everybody else is down at the Wells Fargo Center. So for Sean Barnard, I am Joe Tansey. Best of luck on your bets tonight, everyone, and we will see you Monday night for the national championship. It's gonna be a late one. Got a watch party coming.
Next first beat.
Stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening, everybody, and best of luck on your bets tonight.